The first sound wasn't applause. It was the sickening crash of hundreds of folding chairs hitting the pavement as volunteers watched in disbelief. The stage lights went dark. The microphones fell silent. The wheelchair ramp had been ripped away only hours before one of the most important moments in a remarkable woman's life. Someone had planned every detail to humiliate a paralyzed CEO in front of the entire town. But before despair could win, an old pickup truck rolled into the empty square. Behind it came another. Then another. Within an hour, a quiet driver had done something no billionaire, politician, or celebrity could accomplish. He had brought the whole town. If stories about kindness, courage, hope, and second chances inspire you, we'd love for you to stay with our community and share your thoughts after this journey. At 46, Meredith Holloway had built one of the most respected manufacturing companies in the region without inheriting wealth or relying on powerful connections. She had started with a tiny repair shop and an old warehouse that leaked whenever it rained. For years she worked beside welders, electricians, mechanics, and office assistants, believing every employee deserved respect. Her company grew because people trusted her. They knew she remembered birthdays, visited sick workers in hospitals, and quietly paid tuition for employees who wanted to continue their education. Success never changed the way she greeted the janitor or thanked the receptionist. Everything changed one spring afternoon when a fully loaded truck lost control on a mountain highway. Meredith swerved to protect a family crossing the road. She survived, but the damage to her spine left her permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Doctors warned that her career would probably end. Investors whispered that the company needed someone stronger. Competitors celebrated privately, believing her story had reached its final chapter. Instead, Meredith returned to work 6 months later in a wheelchair with the same determined smile she had worn before the accident. She redesigned offices to become fully accessible, expanded disability hiring programs, and insisted every new company building include features that many businesses ignored. Her greatest achievement was no longer measured by profits. It was measured by the people who finally felt seen. One of those people was her driver, Graham Ellison. Most executives barely noticed the person behind the steering wheel. Meredith treated Graham like family. She learned about his late wife, who had passed away from cancer. She remembered the names of his grandchildren. She encouraged him whenever he doubted himself. Graham had once been a volunteer firefighter and knew nearly everyone within 50 miles. Though quiet and humble, he carried something far more valuable than influence. He carried trust. When the state announced that Meredith would receive its highest civic leadership award, the entire community celebrated. Newspapers praised her resilience. Local schools invited students to write essays about perseverance. The ceremony was scheduled in the town square under bright afternoon sunshine. Families planned picnics. Former employees drove hundreds of miles to attend. Not everyone was pleased. A wealthy developer named Victor Langford had spent years trying to pressure Meredith into selling her company's original factory so he could replace it with luxury apartments. She refused every offer because the factory supported hundreds of local families. Victor saw the award ceremony as more than a celebration. He saw it as another reminder that the town admired the woman who had repeatedly stood in his way. Quietly, he hired people to create chaos before the event. They canceled equipment deliveries using fake emails. Decorative banners disappeared overnight. Volunteers arrived to find extension cables cut into pieces. The wheelchair ramp vanished. Sound equipment had been damaged beyond repair. Anonymous messages spread rumors that the ceremony had been canceled. By noon, organizers stood in tears. The mayor apologized repeatedly, embarrassed beyond words. Sponsors feared a public disaster. News reporters began packing away their cameras. Meredith rolled herself toward the damaged stage and looked across the nearly empty square. For a brief moment, even she struggled to hide the hurt in her eyes. Years of determination suddenly felt very heavy. She had survived an accident that stole the use of her legs, yet someone still wanted to steal her dignity. Graham watched silently from beside the company vehicle. He did not complain. He did not argue. He simply removed his cap, climbed into the pickup truck, and drove away. Nobody knew where he had gone. 20 minutes later, an elderly carpenter named Walter Briggs arrived carrying lumber on his trailer. Without asking questions, he began measuring wood for a new wheelchair ramp. Soon afterward came Nora Bennett, who owned the local hardware store. She unlocked her delivery truck and donated fresh cables, power tools, nails, paint, and everything needed to rebuild. A florist named Evelyn Cross appeared with flowers originally meant for a wedding reception. She smiled and said that beautiful moments should never wait for perfect circumstances. Then came dozens more. Teachers carried folding tables from school gyms. Farmers brought tractors to move equipment. Electricians rewired damaged power lines. Construction workers assembled a safer, stronger stage than the original. Restaurant owners arrived with sandwiches, lemonade, fruit, and homemade pies for every volunteer. Children swept sidewalks. Teenagers decorated the square with handmade ribbons and colorful artwork. Retired musicians unpacked instruments from community centers. Nobody asked who would pay them. Nobody waited for instructions. They came because Graham had knocked on their doors. He never begged. He simply told them that the woman who had spent years lifting everyone else needed help for one afternoon. The answer was immediate. "We're coming." As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the empty square transformed into something more beautiful than anyone had originally planned. There were no expensive decorations. No glamorous displays. No perfect symmetry. There were fingerprints on fresh paint, sawdust on shirts, flour on aprons, and sweat on smiling faces. It was imperfect. It was genuine. When Meredith returned after giving organizers time to regroup, she froze in disbelief. Hundreds of volunteers filled every corner of the square. Some had driven from neighboring counties. Others had closed their businesses early. Former employees hugged one another after years apart. Parents pointed toward Meredith while telling children that kindness always returns home. For the first time since the accident, Meredith lowered her head and quietly cried. Not because she felt weak. Because she finally understood how deeply her ordinary acts of compassion had rooted themselves inside other people's lives. Years earlier she had quietly paid Walter's mortgage when medical bills overwhelmed his family. She had funded Evelyn's flower shop after a devastating fire. She had created scholarships that allowed several local teenagers to attend college. She had hired workers nobody else would employ after injuries or illnesses. She had done these things privately, expecting nothing in return. Now those invisible seeds had become an entire forest of gratitude. Meanwhile, Victor watched from across the street. Nothing had unfolded as he expected. He believed destroying a ceremony would damage Meredith's reputation. Instead, the sabotage revealed something money could never purchase. Love. Respect. Loyalty. When reporters realized what was happening, their cameras returned. But this time they ignored the damaged equipment. They focused on neighbors rebuilding together. The story no longer belonged to an award. It belonged to a community. By late afternoon, the rebuilt stage stood stronger than before. The wheelchair ramp was wider, safer, and decorated with children's painted handprints representing every school in town. As Meredith rolled onto the platform, the applause began softly. Then it grew. People stood shoulder to shoulder across the square. Some wiped away tears. Others embraced family members. Many remembered moments when Meredith had quietly helped them through life's darkest seasons. The mayor admitted that no official speech could fully describe what everyone had witnessed that day. The award itself suddenly seemed small compared to the living example surrounding it. When Meredith accepted the honor, she spoke only briefly. She said that people often believed leadership meant standing in front. But real leadership meant standing beside others until they could stand on their own. She explained that although she could no longer walk, thousands of kind hearts had carried her farther than her legs ever could. She dedicated the award to every ordinary person who chose compassion when nobody was watching. The crowd answered with another standing ovation that echoed through the streets. Even journalists who had covered countless ceremonies admitted they had never witnessed anything like it. In the days that followed, investigators uncovered evidence connecting Victor's hired workers to the sabotage. He faced legal consequences, public criticism, and the collapse of several business partnerships. Yet Meredith surprised everyone once again. She asked the court to consider community service instead of pursuing the harshest possible punishment. She believed accountability mattered. So did redemption. Months later, Victor quietly volunteered to help renovate accessibility ramps at public buildings. Some people questioned whether his change of heart was genuine. Meredith simply believed people should be given the opportunity to become better than their worst decisions. Not everyone accepted his apology. But many respected her willingness to forgive without forgetting the lessons learned. The rebuilt wheelchair ramp remained in the town square long after the ceremony ended. Instead of removing it, residents asked the city to leave it permanently as a reminder that every public place should welcome everyone. A bronze plaque was installed nearby. It did not mention sabotage. It did not celebrate wealth or power. It simply honored the countless neighbors who proved that compassion becomes strongest when people stand together. Years later, visitors still asked why that simple wooden ramp had become a local landmark. Older residents smiled before telling the story of the afternoon when one quiet driver reminded an entire town who they really were. Before we reach the end of this journey, take a moment to share your thoughts. What do you believe is the greatest act of kindness someone has ever shown you, or what lesson about compassion did this story remind you of? Your words might encourage someone else who needs hope today. As Meredith looked across the smiling faces gathered beneath the warm afternoon sun, she realized the greatest award had never been the polished trophy resting in her hands. It was the people standing before her, proving that kindness is never forgotten, dignity can never truly be stolen, and a single life devoted to lifting others can inspire an entire community to rise together. Graham never considered himself a hero. He simply believed that when good people are hurting, neighbors show up. That belief transformed a day meant for humiliation into one remembered for generations as the brightest celebration the town had ever known, leaving every heart with the quiet assurance that hope always grows where compassion is planted.